pretty easy. All you need to do is just send your thoughts and your opinions, even a question really, to us via WhatsApp. The number is 0809 4440981. You can also tweet at smooth981, and we're streaming live on our YouTube channel as well, so you can catch that live stream up on our channel at smooth981. Our analyst is in. It's Chibuzor. Good morning, Chibuzor. Welcome.
Good morning, Zibby. It's been a while.
I
Nice to be
know.
back here with you.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so we're starting off with Punch. Now, power generation has crashed to 43.5 megawatts as grid collapses. Nigeria has now witnessed another collapse of the national grid, leading to a crash in power generation. Now, the spokesperson of the transmission company, Ndidimba, confirmed the collapse of the grid, but was quick to state that the system was restored.
Okay, so sometime yesterday afternoon, the national power grid collapsed again, and the officials of the TCN were able to restore power according to them, according to their spokesperson, about 6:51 in the evening. So if you are like me and the rest of and obviously live in Nigeria, so if you are like me, I got back sometime around that time yesterday evening, and I asked, people at home are like, oh, when last did we have power? And they said 10 a.m. So I was really worried. Um, it's not news that our power grid has collapsed. It's not news that our power grid tends to collapse. And like any other system, it can break. But obviously, you build resilience also into systems. So that's another thing for the guys who specialize in putting together power systems and power grids. But I would give my very honest opinion and 2 cents about this. I think when you have a system that keeps breaking over time, it's obvious that you need either to reinvest into that system, you need to redesign that system, or rethink what you have on ground. And that is obvious to everyone who's within the industry. The biggest challenge for that is the investment into that industry, in that space. Now, why I use the word investment is obviously for you to build systems, for you to repair systems, for you to make systems more resilient and expansive. You need to put money into that system. You need to buy parts. You need to get people to redesign. You need to have alternate means. I think we've grown at the rate at which we've grown as a country and what we project to grow into the economy that our president keeps banning around and our ministers keep banning. I want to get to this trillion type economy, blah blah blah. For us to get there, power is essential because power drives businesses, power drives manufacturing, power drives a lot of things. But it all circles back to investment. Who is going to invest into that system? It's not going. It doesn't look as if it's going to be the federal government is going to be able to support the investment that is required to take that system to the point where all Nigerians will be happy with. Is there enough incentives for the private investors to come into play to place it? Because already you have private investors who are in industry who are complaining about the costing of the utility, which is power today, and not being able to get out their money, their investment. So for most of us, we've seen a slowdown in investments in the power sector due to the fact that there is a push to get right pricing for the product that they are putting out there, and the government and obviously understandably, if you look at the side of the government, because there are 2 major components. And at the start of this year, we removed our subsidies on fuel. The other major thing that also happened at some point was a slight increase in power. Imagine if when you had a commensurate increase to the cost value that most of the investors are asking for, what impact it will have on the people and the polity and consequently the economy. So the government is caught between two positions. How do we balance these balls? But because of that, over time, and obviously the political side of trying to keep the people happy, the government has reneged on several agreements in terms of how do we cost the product, and that has taken its toll obviously on the growth of the industry. So at some point we need to I know the last minister tried to find solutions, or try to put forward solutions to these problems, trying to engage and re-engage. But at some point we probably need to split all the various issues within our power sector, from the TCN to from the transmission company to the various distribution companies, and look at the various issues. But at this point, obviously one thing is clear to all of us, that If we need to move forward and need to avoid these kind of instances, there needs to be some reinvestment and they really look at the design of our current grid system in the country. We can't, a country this large and which is promising to go in the direction that we see that we want to go, cannot afford to have this kind of outages repeatedly in the course of a year.
All right, thank you, Chibuzor, for that. You can, of course, let us know what your thoughts are. 0809 440 981. Let's move on to Vanguard, and this has to do with agriculture. Now, the Senate has urged the executive to ensure allocation of at least 10% of the total annual budget revenue to agricultural production.
So, when I listen to the Senate, I hope that there's a lot of interesting talk when you listen to our representatives, our senators, a lot of, because obviously at first at the top of the list they are politicians, so they are trying to put forward messages that are good for the polity, that keep their constituents happy, that make their constituents believe that they are doing the work. And I'm not saying this because I disagree with what their position on agriculture. I think food security for any country, and even if you forget food security, because food security is basically about being able to provide for the food, for the consumption of Nigerians in Nigeria. If we talk about the potential of getting some form of foreign revenue from packaging our food products, processing them, sending them abroad, selling them to our neighboring countries, because obviously that's something that we're not doing well enough. Getting that value out of this beautiful country where you're able to do agriculture almost 365 days a year across particular plots in the country. A lot of countries do not have that benefit. So we need to ask ourselves that question: what is lacking? Now, while I made the comment about the percentage distribution, is that by the time I put together what these senators are saying that they want to set aside for agriculture, if I add it to what they would tell the ASU or the teachers when they say they want for education, if I add it to what they will tell the guys in the health sector, I'm not sure how much we have left in that budget, because percentages, we just have 100% to cut all of this from. But apart from that point, the reality is that we do need some sizable investment into agriculture. My position and my belief is that a lot of the investment we need into agriculture is not direct. It's not just about direct investment into agriculture. It's about investment into agricultural infrastructure. And I'll give you a good example. Some years ago, I went to Makurdi, Benue State for the first time in my life. I spent some days there, and every day I would go to the market. I would go past the market, and I would see baskets of food which were left to rot out the day before.
Yeah.
And I wondered, if you go through Makurdi, anybody who's been through there, drive through the city, you'd see this grain, you'd see silos, or those beautiful stuff they taught us when we were in science in secondary school, and they're all lying fallow there. There's an old rail track that goes through Makurdi. I think it goes through Nasarawa. And back in the day, those rail tracks were responsible for taking the produced food from the hinterland and taking them to cities where they could pay the value and they could be consumed. Now, that is what some of those farmers need, because if a farmer is spending a sizable part of his time, and we are even talking about the small scale farmers, and we're not talking about the cooperatives and even the guys, he needs to be able to get enough value from his work to be able to pay his bills, to be able to send his kids to school, to be able to give his family at least a decent enough life. That is even in instances where people are even allowed to go to the farm. So when we talk about agriculture, we're not talking about we're not just talking about directly into agriculture. We're talking about infrastructure, security, even how agricultural financing. There's a lot of talk around it. So just ascribing numbers or percentages to the budget will not solve the problem. It's about looking at what is the problem, thinking through what the problem is, connecting the dots across various points. It's not just about the Ministry of Agriculture now. It's about the Ministry of Works. It's about the guy who's in charge of railway. Why would the next railway we are going to build, that should it go through this particular should it go through the food basket of the country and go to the biggest and link up somewhere at Abuja, and from Abuja go through Onitsha, go down to the southwest to Lagos, and what should it carry? Should it just be carrying cattle, or should we carry agricultural products, or should we just be having train lines that are taking people from point to point? We need to think through some of those things systematically. Do we need investment in agriculture? Definitely we do. Should we be talking percentages? I would rather have an idea of a plan about this is how much or what we need to do, then we start basically doing budgeting from the ground, from the bottom up, and saying, okay, here across this, in this ministry, this is how much you need. In that ministry, this is how much you need.
Right.
What are we looking at? This is saying, oh, we're just going to give. We need 10% for agriculture. When the doctors come and say we are going to strike, we are going to increase just from 1% to 15%. They are just not enough percentages to ask to solve the problems in Nigeria today. So we need to take a systematic and strategic view on some of these issues.
So allocating more money is definitely not the solution.
Getting more money is a solution, but just allocating it by saying, oh, dropping percentages, we need to go to 10%. What does 10% really mean? In the grand scheme of things, what does 10% mean?
All right, let's go on to WhatsApp. We have messages coming through. Ajayi says it's surprising that the country is being constantly plunged into darkness as a result of the collapse of the so-called national grid. The state governors should sit up and take advantage of the decentralization of the sector to generate and supply power to their people. All right, let's move on.
Hope the people can pay for it when they do it. That's what the problem is.
Let's move on to Punch. The House of Representatives Committee on Housing and Habitat has expressed its readiness to address the housing needs of Nigerians through legislative intervention.
So this is one of the other things that makes me laugh. And when I laugh, I laugh because I see the inconsistencies in what various parts of our government is trying to do. So when I talk about the government, there's the legislature on one part and there's the executive on the other side, and you have every other body in between. Now, why do I say this? The obviously the House of Reps committee has seen exactly what they need to see. We do have a clear housing problem. You know, how do we solve the housing problem? That is the thing. Part of the problem is obviously laws, prevailing laws, access to land. How do we have land? The current Land Use Act might be a challenge for a lot of things that we're trying to achieve. But there needs to be a clear plan on what we want to achieve, really. And and this clear plan, I talk about systems thinking in Nigeria. I talk about a lot about strategic planning. So I'd give you two examples in the last for this current regime. So we do have the current Minister of Works who is taking upon himself, the former governor of Ebonyi State, who's taking upon himself that, you know what, I'm going to look for an alternate means to build houses, right? Or to do constructions. And he's talking about cement, which is he did for anybody who followed him when he was in Ebonyi State, he did a lot with cement construction. So he's looking at it for roads. He made an appeal to the cement producers to try and drop their costs so that we could make it cheaper to build houses and construct. That's on one side, and that's a component of the entire of the cost of that product. On the other side, so a week ago or some weeks ago, we had a minister of the FCT who declared that he was going to collect 5 million for Sea of Woos. Now, who do you think is eventually going to pay for that 5 million? It's if I have property in Abuja today, and I'm not saying I don't or I do, but if I did have property in Abuja today, I would factor in my cost for getting that CO into the cost I'm going to get that house or that building project when it's done available to whoever is going to stay in it. It's going to be part of my rental cost, because especially if I'm building for investment purposes. The same thing goes when you look at things in Lagos. Okay, there's Land Use Act. At some point somebody has to pay those values. And I'm not saying those things are wrong or right. I'm just saying that on a strategic level, when you are trying to solve a particular problem, you need to look at what is going to give and what is going to give and what's going to take. You can't keep increasing it at one end of the table and trying to reduce it at the other side of the table. You will not get to the solution that you need to get to. So there needs to be an open discussion also involving in industry. And I know these things happen. I just know that when you have these nice gatherings in the hotels, fancy hotels, in the Senate halls, what happens next? What actions happen next? What actionable points do they have? What do they take to go and try and solve those problems? Because as a Nigerian citizen, I don't see too many of those actions coming into place. And what I see with every other thing that is going on, one of the major things that is going up is housing, because a lot of people have set aside housing as an investment point. And obviously, if inflation is catching up with their costs, they are not earning income again, they look back at their investment fund and say, you know what, people need to live in this house and I can increase my prices. And once those prices keep going up, you keep excluding people from having housing, and you keep the problem you're trying to solve, you keep getting farther and farther away from the problem. So it's not a bad idea by, it's a good point of statement by the House of Reps and the committee in understanding that there is a problem, but there needs to be an integrated solution. There needs to be thinking across, but there needs to be agreement. There needs to be plans across with all the state governors, all the stakeholders in the industries. How do we build houses cheaper, safer? How do we make them more affordable? How do we work on our mortgage system? I don't want to talk about the mortgage system. That's another mess in itself. How do we do these things that we want to achieve? It's not just enough to dream it because it's happening somewhere in some utopic part of the world. It's to be able to plan towards it and able to do it at the end of the day.
All right, you're listening to Freshly Pressed on Smooth 98.1. Do stay with us, the conversation continues.
You're listening to Smooth Breakfast. Are you looking for a reliable way to grow
I
your
think it's a
money?
very interesting
Let me
country.
tell you
Very,
about
very
Tell me
ARM.
interesting.
about it.
You look
ARM
for a
is one of
divorce
the
from
largest
reality.
non-bank
That's
financial
just
institutions with over
It just
29
seems
years of
like every
expertise
other
in
day
money
there's
management
one
and
promise
wealth
or one
creation.
thing or
That's
the
almost
other.
3
politicians like to
decades.
promise.
ARM is all
I
about
think politicians like to
ensuring
promise.
your financial goals
I
are
would like
met
to know you're dealing with a master politician in charge. Get a lot of
growing your money
promises.
in safe,
Oh, wow.
Are
well-managed
you going to be able to
investments for
get
important
consistent
goals
behavior?
personal development,
You're not seeing a
vacation,
lot of
rent,
consistency. So
buying
right
a
now,
property.
I'll be going for each
ARM
next
has got you
2024.
covered. We all know
There'll
there
be
are
a
a
lot
lot
of
of apps
calls to
out
this
there to grow
president
your
and his
money,
team. Hey,
but
you've spent
ARM has
a good chunk of
everything you
2023
need to go
junketing
from
around the
where you
world
are
to bring in
to where you
investors.
need to be.
People are going to say, where's
Start
the
your
money?
wealth
Not to see
creation
the
journey
investors now. Where's the
today
money? Where's the
by
jobs you're
downloading
looking
the
for?
ARM
And if you're
One
not able
app
to
on the
deliver, you
Google
see
Play
more government.
Store
But
or
the
iOS
beautiful
Store.
thing about
There are
politicians is that they're
great
not going to
options
react.
for
They'll try, instead
everyone.
of trying
You
to
can even
react
start with as
positively to
low
those
as
things, they'll
1,000
try and
naira.
tighten other things, that
2,000
as
naira. For
distractions.
more
Oh,
information,
They'll start
wow.
visit
reeling out their success stories. Like you said, oh, he should be in
arm.ng
the Guinness
or
Book of
call
Records now of
zero
resources.
one
But I'm
two
like,
seven one 5002.
yeesh.
That's
Oh,
It's
wow.
just, and
01
that's the problem. Nigerians are some of the problem
5002.
because what they will tell some of these
ARM.
politicians are the next
Let's
thing to
face
slice bread.
tomorrow together.
The
They will
praise singers,
keep
yeah,
pushing their ego. So there's really no motivation for them to do the right thing.
right. It's still freshly pressed, Smooth 98.1. And analyst Chibuzor is in. We see your messages coming through. We'll come to them in a second. Okay, maybe in a few minutes. 0809 We're going on to Vanguard. A cash crunch has struck the nation's capital, resulting in long queues at several branches, and this has been revealed by Vanguard. Now, the cash shortage is being attributed to several factors, including a surge in demand for cash ahead of the holidays and logistical challenges in currency distribution.
So we're here again. I hope not. I hope we're not here again. So the story basically speaks about what appears to be shortage of cash, basically in Abuja. That Nigerians are struggling to get cash, due to withdraw cash from their various banks across various points in Abuja. Banks are trying to manage how much they dispense to individuals, limiting 20,000. If you can beg and if you can plead, if you have a connect, you might probably get 30 or 40,000, but that's as much as you can get from the banks. And obviously, like in every other system, businessmen will take advantage of it. So Nigerians should. One of the things I do not like is we should understand human behavior. I've seen a lot of people use words for people who profiteer from situations such as this and call them all sorts of names that they are not patriotic. I'm like, what do you mean by patriotism? If you create a vacuum in a system, people will take advantage of it. It's just profiteering. If I'm the only one selling milk in this community, and all of you demand milk, demand and supply sets in, I will come premium price my can of milk. It's just what it is. We might not like it, but those are the rules of nature. That's the rules. That's the rule of life. Um, to be truthful, when you talk about, there's a point about the POS operators taking advantage of it and increasing their prices. I see some of the rates that are called out here. They're probably equivalent to what you have in Lagos, because some of the rates, I think 500 for 40,000 naira. You probably get a lot more for that charged in Lagos,
Wow.
where there's no scarcity than that. Because I think for 20,000 you probably pay about 400 naira.
Hmm.
So do 40,000, talk about 600 to 800 naira. for 400 for 40,000. But that's besides the point. Now, if we go back earlier in the year, we did have the entire from our former CBN governor had tried to push his policy, or the government's policy at the time, which had reduced the circulation of naira in the system, as they are trying to get rid of the old naira, and there will obviously appear to be not enough supply of the new notes in the system, and obviously had a ripple effect. Now, one of the ripple, obviously, people could not get their cash. In some states, governors took him to court, encouraged their people to use the existing currency, and when the new after May 29, the new government got into place, a lot of those things were reversed. Now, one of the things I thought during that time was, don't let a good crisis go to waste. While the plan for changing naira notes looked like it was poorly delivered or was poorly implemented, some of the pillars on which that plan stood out were valid. There was a thought there has always, in the last time I think 10 years or more, there's been the talk of moving to a cashless society. I do not see it happening in the shortest possible time that Nigeria will move entirely to a cashless society. But within that crisis, what we had is that in in the shortest possible time, we had a larger uptake of cashless type payments or non-cash based payments. You had people even hawking on the streets of Lagos who were selling water in traffic and had their POS or their account numbers on cards that you could see and transfer the money to while they were making those things. You had, women in the markets were forced to take cash transfers into various accounts by various banks or financial institutions. You saw some uptake, you saw some things. It wasn't perfect. I believe that we have a long way to go. But what I felt is that even after we went through the political reversal and the reversal of the policy and tried to move on from it, that we should have taken advantage of that crisis in quotes to further push that system. We are taking advantage of it to ensure that how do we make this system, this current process that we want with these cashless transactions more, how do we get the industry guys to support it to make it less stressful, more flexible, get a lot more vendors on board of it so that we would have less pressure on the naira? Because the truth is that for every naira note that the CBN prints, there is a cost. So there's a cost, and there's also a cost circulating around across the country. That cost is going to be borne by the CBN, which is borne by the federal government, which is essentially borne by Nigerians. So we do need to understand there's a cost. Is it right that it's a shortage? Obviously, I do not want there to be a shortage because it means that I'll pay more for the naira that I'm getting less value for already. So it's a bit of a challenge. But what I'm saying that we need to look at what do we need to push on from some of the gains of January, February to March this year, while we try to sort out the issue of the supply of the naira now. But we need to take on those gains and get to the point where the average Nigeria, the woman who's selling tomatoes down the street, is able to either take some form of digital payment or some of cash, non-cash based payment with ease, without having to keep me hostage to ensure that the money appears in my account, or is distrustful of it, or is you have signs. Have some places you still have signs that, oh, I do not collect, do not do transfers, or do not do this. We need to look at this and see, how do we get the private sector in to actually put out these products and services? How do we get the people to take these things off? How do we give them incentives to utilize these things and ease that pressure on the CBN? But yes, this is a clear problem that the CBN needs to sort out. It's either if there is a problem that exists, they need to sort it out quickly, and especially obviously we are going into Unitide. Nigerians like to spray at parties. Nigerians want to give money as gifts. Nigerians want to travel by road and do all sorts of things that require cash in their villages, in their hometowns, with their people. So this is the wrongest time for there to be a cash scarcity. Please, CBN, this is our public, our clarion call from streets.
Help us, please.
We're already going through a lot.
Exactly. And what you stated about, paying more for the naira with less value, that is just a hit home, really. Let's move on to Daily Trust. Special advisor to the President on Health, Dr. Salma Anas Ibrahim, says the poorly functional primary healthcare system remains a major contributor to maternal and child fatalities in Nigeria.
So one of the metrics that used to rank societies is maternal or paternal, you know, basically childbirth, death during childbirth. Sorry, where am I? So one of the metrics I used to judge most societies, developing societies, obviously is, how you're able to bring children into your society, what happens to the mother and the child after that process, how do they remain alive and live a normal life, or are they exposed to the various health challenges that cause them to lose their lives, and that's what we're basically speaking to in this case. And it's good that the presidency understands that this is a challenge for Nigeria today. When you're looking at the deaths of mothers, deaths of children at young ages, before particular ages, it's good that the presidency understands that this is a major challenge. But understand that it's a major challenge and a major problem is one thing. Another thing is, how do we solve this issue? And a lot of this, she's attributed I think special advisor of the president attributed it to the poor primary healthcare centers, or the poor facilities at primary healthcare centers. Now, next thing is, how do they intend to solve it? How do they intend to work with the states? How do they intend to work with the local government to solve this problem? Next thing that Nigerians are waiting for, because if we tie it back to some of the other things we've talked about doctors and medical professionals leaving the country, it's not only about their wages and salaries. It's also about them having to work in conditions where they know they cannot bring out their best. Work in conditions when they see people dying from things that they could have prevented if they had the right equipment, if they had the right facilities, if they had the right support. That is another factor that has caused a lot of them to say, I can do better than this, and then I'm not getting the satisfaction, I'm not getting the pay, so I can move on to something else. Those are some of the things that drive some of this behavior. How do we solve that problem? Like I go back to this first story about percentages. So we've given 10% to agriculture. What now do we have for healthcare? So healthcare does require a lot of investment. I know that this current government has promised that they will do a lot, because of in trying to tackle the issues with the governor, with the doctor. Sorry, they have said that they will do a lot to try and sort out the problems. Within this story also, you have so you have the president of one of I think ANHE1. I'm trying to find out what acronym means here in the story. Okay, yeah, that's the Association of Nigerian Health Journalists, because that's where the president's advisor was speaking at their conference in Akwanga. He's also asked that 15% of the budget be allocated to healthcare. So I'm taking 15% for healthcare, 10% for agriculture. So education is going to take how much now? Then infrastructure is going to take. So that's some of the problems. And I'm not decrying the fact that we need that amount of investment. It's about, I would rather talk less about percentages, more about what we want to sort out, because I do not think the government is going to be able to fund everything in 1 year. But let's have a plan of what we want to do. Let's have a vision of what we want to have. These days we are seeing a lot of politicians going to go and set up their own pet projects in their various hometowns, building their own hospitals and all that. And it's fine to see, but do we have, and she's mentioned the primary healthcare system is the first point of call for most Nigerians, or it should be the first point of call for Nigerians when they fall ill within their various localities. If it's not working, it means that are being put under pressure, and obviously that's a cascading effect. We're going to get to that point so that we can look at our because we have a young country. Solve that problem to be able to say that you're looking at our mothers are not going into having children that are going to die. We are going to, our mothers are not going into childbed worried and scared that this is a trial of life, which it normally is. But hey, if you have the good facilities and you're going to these systems, there's a lot more comfort into it, and it tells you that how much a country values its peoples to the lowest form of, how a country values its peoples and how the country invests in. Those are some of the things that you look at when a country is actually developing. What are we focusing on within our, who are we? Are we focusing on the most disadvantaged parts of our system, our society? Or are we just here to feed the top 1%, which unfortunately looks like what we are doing in Nigeria at the moment?
Let's go on to the messages. Emeka says, I'm presently in a rural community in Benue State where I see this a lot. Poverty and illiteracy is another major reason why there are child and maternal mortalities. If you fund the primary healthcare centers, what happens to these other factors? There are families that can't afford simple mosquito nets. It's sad. Fabian says the government and legislature should urgently begin to walk the talk. Companies that we grew up with are leaving in droves in manufacturing and pharmaceutical sectors. Even feel scarcity is looming. They shouldn't wait for a total breakdown to occur. One more message from Dan Okuda, and he says, is managing the power distribution system rocket science? Why is it our national power grid is collapsing every time? Something is wrong somewhere. Well, that's all the time that we have for Freshly Pressed this morning. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your messages. And of course, special thanks to Chibuzor, our analyst.
Thank you so much. It's been nice being here once again.
Do stay with us. There's a